Welcome to Midlife Hobbies and my gently used painting area. In this video we are going to go over the process of dry brushing a miniature. We're preparing it to be painted with some highly thinned paints that will work like a glaze. This will add a colored tint to the tonal shading we'll get from dry brushing the miniature before painting it. Painting with thinned paints can also be called speed painting or slap chop. The dry brushing end result can also be called zenithal highlighting, but no need to get technical. Let's just have fun with it. Let's prepare our painting space. You don't need a wet palette, but I would highly suggest using one as it makes your paint stay usable longer. When actually painting the mini, it allows you to come back to a color later for touch-ups. Before we jump in, let's have a look at the 3 stages the miniature will be at during this video. The first mini in this example is primed with a dark primer. We don't show that in this video, but it's already been done. The second is after the gray dry brush has been completed. And the final mini shows the final dry brushing result. I have very little free-flowing water around the edges of the wet palette sponge, but I always squirt it with distilled water before applying the wet palette paper. Or rather, hamburger patty separating parchment paper. You can find it for $12 per 1,000 sheets on Amazon. You can tame the wild wet palette paper simply by holding down the edges for a few seconds. Once they are done curling as a reaction to the moisture, you can just smooth out the remaining edge curls. Today I will be using some gray paint that I picked up on sale at Michael's. It's designed for pour art, so it's fairly runny, which makes it great to use in an airbrush. But we will be applying it by brush today. I wrote the mixing ratios on the bottle. There's no need to thin the paint for brush application, but a 50-50 mix with distilled water is needed if using it in an airbrush. We don't need to pour much paint, as this is a smaller miniature. A green pea-size pool should be more than enough. Grab your favorite dry brushing brush. I own high-grade goat hair dry brushes, mid-grade synthetic dry brushes, but I always use the makeup brush I bought from the local dollar store. I love it so much I've picked up an extra. Don't let anyone tell you that you need an expensive brush to do quality dry brushing. It may seem a little extra to wear a nitrile glove when painting minis, but I've had paint and primer rub off during a painting session in the past, from oils on the skin. The oil can also make the paint react differently on the mini where you've been handling it. You may need more than one piece of paper towel for this. You can even use a reusable cloth. But I'm just not that cool yet. In this video we'll be dry brushing a Mimic D20 dice. I love using this mini for testing and experimenting. I've already primed it. We'll talk about priming in a future video. What you need to know here is that the primer needs to be a really dark color, because by the end of this dry brushing session only the deepest shadowy areas will be this darker primer color. I used a Panzer Gray primer from Vallejo, but any dark or black primer will get you ready for this step. Pre-wet your dry brush. I know it's called dry brushing, but it isn't done with a completely dry brush. That would cause streaking. Be sure to dry the brush on the paper towel until there's no more water coming from it. Get some paint on the end of the brush, and then wipe it all off on the paper towel. Move the brush up, down, side to side and in circles to remove the excess paint from the brush. Yes, we are abusing this brush, but it's for the greater good of a proper dry brushing. If this is done right you will see almost no paint coming off the brush before you start brushing your miniature. Brush lightly for the first few strokes. If you get streaking or a bunch of paint being left behind, rub more off of your brush onto the paper towel. You'll notice that the edges are catching most of the paint. But much of the miniature itself would get some gray paint on it. This is exactly what we want. Don't brush over the same spot for too many strokes. You need to let it dry. Move your attention and the brush around the miniature, or you may start smearing the paint, or even rubbing it off of the higher surfaces. You don't want to get the gray paint into the deepest recesses of the miniature, where there would be natural shadows. For this mini, that would be in the back of the mouth. I know your mini may be different, but the under or bottom side of things are where there would naturally be shadows. This is where you would avoid, or only do a very light brushing there. If you feel you wouldn't know what to avoid, try setting your mini on a table, and shine a flashlight on it directly from above. This will show you the areas where natural shadows would occur. For now, our dry brushing will pretend the light is coming directly from above the Mini. You may feel like there is too much gray highlighting, and not enough dark-toned shadow showing from the primer. But, colored paint has trouble showing its vibrance when painted over a dark surface. The dry brushing will highlight nearly the whole Mini, with the edges and details being the lightest. In this reference image, you can see the three tones we're working with during dry brushing. The dark primer for dark color tones, the gray dry brush, which we are doing right now, which will show the mid-color tones, and then the white dry brushing that we will be doing next for the high color tones. In the orange color line example here, you can see how thin paint's present differently on each of these tones. We want the model to mostly be covered in the mid-tone gray color. This isn't a recipe, but 5% dark-toned shadows, 85% average tones, and 10% highly lit color tones is a pattern you will see repeating the more you paint miniatures. Notice how poorly the color shows up over the dark primer. We don't want much of the model being that dark because paint will dry darker. And any washes you use after painting can darken the colors even more. I'm talking about you, Nuln Oil. If you don't know what that is, we will be talking about it in a future video. Here is a freshly primed miniature versus the dry brushed one. This is only the mid-tone gray dry brushing done, but it makes a big difference, doesn't it? Now we move on to dry brushing the high tones by using white paint. Don't let anyone talk you into thinking you need expensive paint. The Mini shown at the end of the video as the final painted result was painted using inexpensive tube acrylic paints from Amazon. You'll notice in all of my videos that I use a mix of inexpensive and hobby brand paints. No need to pay the hobby tax, unless what you have isn't working for you. Clean the gray paint off of your brush. Remove the excess water from the brush just as we did before. Just flip over the paper towel for a clean side. As you get more practice doing these things, you'll use less consumable products like paper towel. I'm testing the dry brushing readiness of the white paint on the bottom of the miniature. White is a strong highlight, and I don't want to streak up the Mini with an overage of white paint. Not that some streaking is a bad thing, it adds flavor and variety to the colors. Don't be too hard on yourself. If things aren't perfect, just relax and have fun. If you mess up too much, you can always just prime the Mini and start fresh. Some people keep a flat piece of Lego at their painting desk to test the readiness of their dry brush by testing it on the bumpy Lego surface before switching to their miniature. I love this idea, but I haven't done it yet. You can just wash the paint off the Lego and keep using it. With the white dry brushing, we just want to dry brush the very tops of prominent surfaces. Again, you can use the flashlight method to see what gets the most light. Let's just dry brush the top facing areas. The edges will catch most of the white paint, and then flat surfaces less, just like with the gray dry brushing we did. Brush lightly, so that you don't get the white paint into the cracks where you want the gray and dark primer to help with shading the paint colors for you later. I'll try to not get white paint in the recessed numbers on this D20 dice mimic because I want the number to stand out. It's a subtle difference between the gray and white dry brushing, but it will show up much more once you start adding colored paint. Why do they touch tongues? Yeah, I don't know, but it seemed like the fun thing to do at the time. The dry brushing is complete. Here is an example of another Mini that was dry brushed using the same method. And here is the final painted Mini that we dry brushed in this video. If you've enjoyed or learned anything from this video, please like and subscribe. We have more cool midlife hobby content on the way.